The sound was the first thing I registered. A horrifying crack as the back of my skull slammed into the tiled edge of the wall. It was the sound of collapse. Not just bone. It was the collapse of a belief that had lasted 72 years. A blinding bolt of pain exploded behind my eyes. It burned and cut sharp like an axe striking straight into my consciousness. I collapsed. The world flipped over, my vision fixed on the butter-yellow kitchen wall. The paint color looked absurd in this moment. I had mixed and painted it myself 30 years earlier just to make Grace happy. Now it was the last thing I saw before the darkness came. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt like it was crushed under a massive stone. I felt the cold from the floor seep into my skin through my old shirt. I am 72 years old and my only child had just assaulted me. Elijah. The boy I once carried in my arms. The child I swore to protect with my life. He stood there. There was not a trace of remorse in his eyes. Only impatience, hatred, and a blind hunger for material things. I heard footsteps on the dry grass in the backyard. Then the dry pop of a beer can opening. The sound of celebration. Amelia stepped into my blurred view. She did not bend down to check whether I was alive or dead. She leaned against the doorway. Her bright red lips curved into a poisonous smile. She handed Elijah a cold beer. Her voice rang out, clear and cruel. She said, "The old man is finally gone. Now we can finally live." Each word stabbed into my ears like needles. Now we can live. She meant they could live in this house. On my efforts. On the ashes of my life. Elijah did not answer. He simply took a long drink of the beer. That silence hurt more than the blow. It was agreement. It was the complete erasure of my existence. I lay there, between darkness and awareness. My trembling hands touched the edge of the wooden table. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why. But my throat was locked. The physical pain was now only a faint whisper compared to the storm tearing through my heart. This was the beginning of the end. Or perhaps it was the beginning of a punishment they never imagined. You want me gone. You want freedom built on my sacrifice. Just wait. I closed my eyes and let the cold spread. But in my mind a cold fire began to ignite. Elijah, Amelia, you have made the biggest mistake of your lives. You think I am old and useless. You think I have completely fallen. But you forgot one thing. This house was built with my bones and my flesh. And I know every corner of it. Even the places where darkness lives. The game has only just begun. And the price for your freedom will be more than anything you could ever afford. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, sit back, and stay calm. Today's story reflects a small but especially dark side of human nature that is becoming more common in modern society. Leave a comment and subscribe to support the channel and motivate me to keep creating stories like this. Darkness swallowed me on the cold kitchen floor, but my mind was dragged back into the past. Back to the days when the sun burned our skin on this dusty land. 30 years ago. This place was nothing but an empty patch of wilderness. Grace and I stood there, our hands tightly clasped together. We had nothing except a dream and a plan sketched quickly on a piece of cement paper. We built it with our own hands every weekend for 2 years. I remember the smell of freshly cut pine. I remember the rough texture of the red bricks. Grace would often wipe the sweat from my forehead with her small embroidered handkerchief. She would smile. That smile was all the motivation I needed to swing the hammer again. Every nail I drove down was a promise for the future. Every bucket of mortar poured was another brick in the home we were building for Elijah. We did not hire workers. We did not have extra money. But we had love and a stubborn persistence that bordered on madness. Then Grace was gone. She left on a windy autumn afternoon, leaving me and a little boy in a house that still smelled like fresh paint. A single father raising his son. My world collapsed. But I was not allowed to fall. Elijah needed a future. I threw myself into work like a wounded animal. I worked 16 hours every day at the woodworking shop. My hands cracked and bled from sawdust. At night I rushed to the bakery to knead dough. The metallic taste of exhaustion always lingered in my throat. I did not want Elijah to break his back under the sky like I did. I wanted his hands to stay clean. I wanted him to hold a pen instead of a hammer. I paid every one of his college tuition bills with the price of my chronic back pain. I skipped meals so he could wear the most expensive shirts. I was so proud when I saw him graduate. I thought I had completed the mission of a father. But I was wrong. I had unknowingly raised a parasite inside my own chest. Elijah came back, and he brought Amelia with him. She was like a poisonous wind blowing through this house. They asked to stay for 6 months to save money. I opened my doors. I cleared the best room in the house for them, but 6 months became a year. A year became 2. They did not save money. They only saved their strength so they could drain mine. I began to feel like a stranger in the very house I had built. They took over the living room. They changed the furniture. They looked at me like I was an outdated antique that took up space. I stood in the old woodworking shed behind the house, looking at the tools that had rusted over time. My heart tightened when I realized the bitter truth. When you open your heart too wide, sometimes you unknowingly invite people who will trample it to pieces. I gave Elijah everything, and now he repaid me with a blow from behind. He wants this house. He wants to erase every trace of me and Grace. He wants to turn our sanctuary into a playground for his vanity. But he forgot something. This house knows who its true owner is. Every piece of wood, every brick is soaked with my sweat. They do not belong to the lazy and the cruel. The takeover began with the smallest things. First were Grace's photo frames on the fireplace shelf. Amelia said they looked gloomy and outdated. She replaced them with cheap plastic flowers and flashy check-in photos of themselves. Next was the scent of the house. The smell of baked bread and old wood was replaced by heavy perfume and the cigarette smoke from Elijah. Slowly, I was pushed out of the spaces I had breathed in for 3 decades. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. Elijah stood at the door of the master bedroom. He did not look me in the eye. He stared at the wall behind me. He said, "You are old now, Dad. Climbing the stairs every day is not good for your knees anymore. Amelia and I cleaned up the room next to the water heater in the basement for you. It is smaller and more convenient." I stood frozen. That was the bedroom Grace, and I chose the curtain color for together. That was where I held her hand for the last time. And now they pushed me into a small room beside the water heater that clanked all night. A dark and damp basement room. A place I once used only to store old boxes. Every night, the heater roared like a metal beast right beside my ear. It kept me from sleeping. But the thing that kept me awake was not the noise. It was the feeling of being pushed to the edge of my own life. I had become a ghost wandering inside my own home. Then the financial abuse began to reveal itself. Amelia started using my credit card for new sofas and extravagant parties. Strange bills arrived in the mail. When I asked Elijah, he waved his hand dismissively. "You are going to leave the house to us anyway, Dad, so why complain?" He spoke as if I were already dead. As if my property was a dowry he was automatically entitled to. The worst moment came when I discovered Elijah had forged my signature to borrow $5,000 from the bank. My hands trembled as I held the loan paper. My vision blurred. The son I raised with honesty had become a man who cheated his own father. I confronted him in the kitchen. Amelia stood behind him, chewing gum casually. She sneered and said the old man still keeps those papers. Elijah shouted that he needed capital to start a business. He said I was selfish for holding on to my retirement money. In desperation, I returned to the only corner of memory I had left. An old tin box hidden beneath the basement floor. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a thick manila envelope, the original house ownership papers. The name Elias Vance stood clearly on the yellowed document. It was the last proof that I existed. You think I have lost everything. You think I am a weak old man who will never fight back. Upstairs, their laughter echoed through the house. Loud music and heavy footsteps slammed onto the wooden floor I once cared for so carefully. They were celebrating on top of my misery, but they did not know that I was holding my weapon tightly in my hands. I looked at the small photo of Grace. Quietly, I made a promise to her. I will not let them stain this house any longer. At last, the last straw fell, and the cup finally overflowed. After a day lying in that dark storage room, enduring both the pain of physical injury and the torment of emotional wounds, I decided to leave the house late that afternoon. I carried no bulky suitcase, only an old manila envelope tucked tightly under my arm. I walked away without turning back. The oak door slammed behind me like a desperate farewell. I went to Isabella's house. She had been our neighbor for many years. When she opened the door, her eyes filled with shock. She saw the bruises on my neck. She saw the shattered look in my eyes. In Isabella's small kitchen, I sat quietly. I felt like a ghost taking shelter. A homeless man in the very neighborhood where I had lived half my life. Isabella placed a cup of hot tea in front of me. She said nothing. Her silence was the only comfort I had at that moment. But then she took out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it to me. "You should see this," she whispered, her voice heavy with pity. It was a video recorded at the party that began right after I had been thrown out of my own house. On the screen, Amelia stood on the new leather sofa that had been bought with my money. She lifted a crystal glass filled with red wine high into the air. She laughed loudly, her face twisted with triumph. She shouted over the pounding music, "Freedom at last. The old man is finally gone. Now this house belongs completely to us." Elijah stood right beside her. He did not stop her. He raised his glass and laughed along with her. In that moment, something inside me died, and something far more frightening was born. A cold fury began to spread through every cell in my body. It was not the kind of anger that wants to smash things. It was a terrifying calm. My hands stopped trembling. They became perfectly still. The pain faded. The hesitation disappeared. In its place came a purpose. Clear. Sharp. Like a blade. I was no longer the pitiful father being bullied by his own children. I looked at the phone screen one more time, memorizing every face that was laughing at me. "You think a fake debt document and a little aggression can steal my legacy? You think my kindness was weakness? You were wrong. I spent my entire life building things. And if necessary, I know exactly how to dismantle them." I looked at Isabella and nodded. "Thank you. Now I know what I have to do." I stood up, my back straighter than it had been in years. I looked out the window toward my house. The lights from the party were still flashing bold and defiant, but I no longer felt fear. I saw a path. I saw a reckoning that had to be carried out. I would take my house back, not with fists, but with the very power they believed they had already taken from me. Justice is not always warm. Sometimes it is as cold as frost. I opened the manila envelope. The property ownership documents glowed under the kitchen light. They were the sentence awaiting Elijah and Amelia. Tonight would be the last night they slept peacefully in that house. I would reclaim every brick, every beam of wood, every inch of space that Grace and I had built together with our lives. Their game ended the moment they recorded that video. The next morning I did not return home. I went straight to the law office of Elizabeth Diaz. She was a sharp woman with eyes that could see through any lie. I placed the manila envelope on her desk. I told her about the fall on the kitchen floor, about the credit card bills under Amelia's name, about Elijah forging my signature on the $5,000 loan. Elizabeth listened. She did not interrupt, but I saw her eyebrows tighten behind her jeweled glasses. "This is not just a family conflict," Elizabeth said firmly. "This is elder abuse and illegal asset exploitation." She looked at the bruise still visible on my neck. "We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges, but I know you want more than that. You want real justice." I nodded. "I want them out. Immediately. I want my house free from those parasites." The plan was arranged quickly and precisely like a military operation. Elizabeth contacted the local police and child protective services. We had to ensure Sophia's safety. My poor granddaughter could not be trapped in the middle of this war. My heart tightened when I thought about her. But I knew this was the only way to protect her future. A toxic environment like that would destroy Sophia's spirit before she had the chance to grow up. I sat in a police car parked at the corner of the street, looking toward the house where I had laid every brick with my own hands. Music was still blasting from inside. They were partying again, enjoying their false victory. Elijah stood on the porch holding a glass of wine. He looked pathetic in expensive clothes he had never sweated to earn. Amelia was laughing with a group of unfamiliar friends. They treated my house like a free nightclub. It was time to end this performance. I stepped out of the car. 2 police officers and Elizabeth walked with me. The feeling of power did not come from weapons. It came from truth, and the law standing beside me. I felt my chest expand. The pain from the fall seemed to fade away. In its place was a terrifying clarity. We stepped onto the porch. Elijah saw me. The glass in his hand trembled. Amelia's smile vanished. The police officer stepped forward. He did not need to raise his voice, but his tone carried authority. This property is legally registered to Elias Vance. You have 30 minutes to collect essential personal belongings. Elijah stuttered. Dad, what are you doing? This is our house. I looked directly into his eyes, a cold gaze he had never seen before. I said, no, Elijah. This has never been your house. You were only a guest who stayed too long, and now the party is over. Humiliation spread through the air. Amelia screamed. She cursed and tried to rush toward Elizabeth, but the officers stopped her. Their friends slipped out the back door like rats afraid of the light. Elijah stood there shaking. Pathetic. He began stuffing his belongings into black trash bags under police supervision. Every luxurious item they bought with my money now lay scattered across the floor. Justice is not just a word. It is the sound of trash bags dragging across a wooden floor. The door of the police car slammed shut. Silence suddenly fell over everything. Elijah and Amelia were gone. They took their chaos with them, and the trash bags filled with their greed. I stood alone in the living room. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the window. It illuminated the dust drifting through the air. The house was empty. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe again. My lungs were no longer squeezed by their toxic presence. I began the work of bringing the house back to life. I did not sit down and cry. I picked up a broom. I swept away the broken glass from their reckless parties. I wiped the stains from the wooden floor I had once cared for so carefully. Every sweep of the broom felt like a step toward washing away betrayal. I removed the loud, colorful curtains Amelia had hung everywhere. I opened every window wide. The wind rushed inside. It carried the scent of wild grass and freedom. The heavy perfume smell finally disappeared. I walked upstairs. My steps were slow on each wooden stair. I pushed open the door of the master bedroom. The room now held nothing but an empty bed, but I did not feel lonely. I walked to the small hidden cabinet they had never discovered. I took out Grace's photograph. I gently wiped the dust from the glass. My hands were completely steady now. I placed the photo back on the bedside shelf where it had always been. Hello, my love. I am home again, Grace. I sat down in the old rocking chair. The house was quiet. But it was not the frightening silence of a grave. It was the sound of peace, the sound of freedom, the sound of a life reclaimed. I listened to the rustling of the oak tree in the yard, the chirping of birds searching for their nests, small sounds that had been buried for so long beneath shouting and humiliation. I closed my eyes. I could feel the spirit of the house slowly waking again. Reflection flooded my mind. I was wrong to believe that unconditional sacrifice was the purest form of love. I was wrong to let them trample my boundaries in the name of family. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to destroy you. Being family is not a license for abuse. At 72, I learned the most expensive lesson of my life. A person's self-respect must never be negotiated, not even with those who share your blood. I looked out the window as the sky began to darken. I knew the road ahead would still involve legal procedures. I knew Elijah might continue to resent me, but none of that mattered anymore. I had protected Grace's legacy. I had protected myself. I would never again make myself small to tolerate someone else's cruelty. My house is a sanctuary, not a sacrifice. I smiled alone in the darkness, a quiet, peaceful smile. I knew I would sleep well tonight. The water heater still clanked in the basement, but now it sounded like a familiar heartbeat, and at last I was truly its rightful owner. But deep down I could still feel it. Something was not finished yet. The story was not over. The next morning I woke as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains of the master bedroom. No more water heater roaring beside my ear. No more damp basement air creeping into my bones. I stretched slowly. A pure sense of freedom ran down my spine. But the feeling faded when I noticed a small teddy bear lying forgotten under the table. Sophia's. My heart tightened. Elijah and Amelia might be guilty, but the child was completely innocent. I picked up the teddy bear. It still carried the soft scent of baby powder. I remembered the innocent look in Sophia's eyes when she once asked why Grandpa had to sleep in the basement. I had swallowed my tears and smiled for her. The poison of her parents' behavior had hung over her childhood like a dark cloud. In that moment, I realized that taking back this house was not only about justice for myself, it was about building a safe fortress for Sophia's future. My phone vibrated. A message from Elizabeth Diaz. She informed me that Child Protective Services had completed the temporary paperwork. Because Elijah and Amelia currently had no stable housing and had shown violent behavior, I would be granted temporary guardianship of Sophia. A surge ran through my body. Part pressure, part hope. I was no longer just an old man quietly fading into retirement. I had a purpose again. I had to protect the only young branch of the Vance family from being destroyed by greed. I began cleaning the small room that once belonged to Elijah when he was young. I removed the strange posters and the empty liquor bottles he had left behind. I painted the walls a calm, pale blue. Every stroke of the brush felt like an apology to Sophia. An apology for letting her see things she should never have witnessed. An apology for my weakness for far too long. I would rebuild her world right here. In the house where her grandmother once dreamed about generations growing together. The doorbell rang. I walked to the door and saw Sophia standing there with a social worker. The little girl ran into my arms and burst into tears. "Grandpa, I was so scared." I held her small, trembling body tightly. "Do not be afraid, Sophia. Grandpa is here now. This house belongs to you too. No one will ever drive us away again." Over her shoulder I saw Elijah standing near the gate. He looked disheveled and furious. But when he saw the determination in my eyes, he stepped back. He understood that this boundary could not be crossed. The silence of a grandfather is not weakness. It is the strength of love that knows its limits. I brought Sophia inside and closed the oak door. This time I locked it firmly. Not to imprison myself, but to keep every trace of toxicity outside this sanctuary. I looked up at Grace's photograph. I could almost see her smiling. We had done it. We had protected this home for the one who truly deserved it. I sat down on the floor and played with Sophia. The laughter of a child echoed through the house. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. It chased away the shadows of the past. The house was alive again because it was filled with love instead of calculation. But the scent of betrayal does not disappear so easily. It lingers in hidden corners, faint but stubborn like smoke that refuses to fade. I knew that healing would take time. Yet for the first time in a long while, hope had a place to grow inside these walls. Everything seemed settled once Sophia returned. But the ghost of betrayal still lingered in the old drawers of the house. One evening, while organizing documents in my small office, I touched a drawer that had been stuck for years. I pulled harder. A pale yellow envelope fell out. It had been trapped behind the drawer for who knows how long. These were documents Elijah had left behind in his panic when he was forced out. I opened it, and my breath froze. Inside were not just unpaid bills. It was a detailed plan to sell the house drafted 6 months earlier. Elijah and Amelia had contacted a real estate company. They had forged my signature on a fake will. Their plan was to send me to the cheapest nursing home they could find the moment they secured the paperwork. Every lifeless line on those pages struck my face like a slap. They did not only want the house, they wanted to erase my existence in a systematic way. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. The son I had sacrificed my life to raise had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle that needed to be removed. This truth hurt more than the fall on the kitchen floor. It was a betrayal that cut into the very foundation of what it means to be human. I sank into my chair. My hands crushed the papers until they wrinkled. The cold anger returned again, but this time it carried something sharper, a ruthless determination. I would never allow them another chance to return to my life. I picked up the phone and called Elizabeth Diaz. My voice sounded frighteningly calm. "I have found evidence of an organized plan to steal my property. I want to pursue charges completely. No forgiveness. No mercy." Elizabeth answered in a steady professional tone. "This changes everything. Elijah could face prison." I closed my eyes. A single hot tear slid down my cheek. Prison for my own son. That is the greatest tragedy a father can imagine. But I knew there was no other choice left. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the backyard, the place where Elijah once played as a little boy. I realized then that loving someone the wrong way can become poison. I had sheltered him too much. I had protected him from every consequence life could have taught him. And now I had to be the one to teach him the final lesson. The lesson of responsibility. A man must answer for what he has done, even if the price is his freedom. I burned the plan inside the fireplace in the living room. I watched the lies curl and blacken as the flames consumed them. The firelight reflected in my eyes with a new kind of resolve. I was no longer the Elias Vance from 6 months ago. I had been reborn from the ashes of betrayal. I looked at Sophia sleeping peacefully on the sofa. Quietly, I made a promise to her. Grandpa will protect this world for you, even if it means becoming ruthless in the eyes of others. My heart now felt like a piece of wood hardened by fire. Strong, unbreakable. I knew I was doing the right thing. Protecting justice sometimes means cutting away the infected flesh, even when that flesh once belonged to someone you loved most. The day of the trial arrived on a gray morning. The sky hung low and heavy over the rooftops. I tied the tie Grace had given me on our 30th anniversary. My hands did not tremble anymore. I stood in front of the mirror. A 72-year-old man with the wrinkles of determination carved into his face. Elijah sat on the bench across the courtroom. He looked hollow. The cheap suit could not hide how broken he seemed. Amelia sat beside him. The triumph was gone from her face. Only fear remained beneath the heavy layer of makeup. All the evidence was presented. The video from Isabella's house, the forged plan to sell the home, the false signature, the reckless credit card bills. One by one, everything was exposed under the cold lights of justice. Elizabeth Diaz spoke with a sharp precision that cut through the room. She did not call it a family dispute. She called it a financial and emotional assassination. Elijah kept his head down. He could not look at me. Perhaps he saw the shadow of the father who once carried him on his shoulders now standing as the man who had brought him to this moment. The moment the judge announced the sentence was when the truth struck like thunder. 18 months in prison for document forgery and elder abuse. Elijah collapsed into the bench. Amelia screamed and cried. She turned toward me with pleading eyes. "Father, please withdraw the charges." But I stood there, silent like an old wooden statue. My compassion had drained away on the kitchen floor that day. I did not feel triumph. I only felt a painful calm. A final debt had been paid. The officers led Elijah past me. He stopped for a single second. His eyes were red. He whispered in a hoarse voice, "I am sorry, Dad." I looked at him. The son I had spent a lifetime loving. I answered him not with hatred but with truth. "Elijah, I forgive you as a human being. But as your father, I must allow you to learn responsibility. You did not only strike me, you struck the soul of this family." The courtroom doors closed behind them. The cold sound of chains echoed down the hall. I stepped outside. The air felt strangely clean. The storm inside my heart had passed. All that remained was a wide, empty space that felt purified. I had cut away the rot to save what life remained. I was no longer a victim. I was the survivor of a battle I had never wished to fight. I walked home, each step steady on the pavement. The house appeared at the end of the street, standing strong and proud under the midday sun. It was no longer a piece of property to be fought over. It was my sanctuary, the place where I would spend the rest of my days rebuilding a future for Sophia, writing new chapters that carried no lies. I opened the gate. The hinge creaked like a quiet greeting welcoming its owner home. Justice is not always revenge. Sometimes it is simply the restoration of the natural order of the heart. I stepped inside. The scent of old wood and peace surrounded me. Everything was finished. And everything was just beginning. The house was completely quiet. Not the lifeless silence of a grave. It was the sound of peace, the sound of freedom, the sound of a life reclaimed. I stood in the middle of the living room. The sunset cast long amber streaks across the wooden floor. I began one final act of restoration. I cleaned the last pieces of debris left behind from the reckless party. I wiped the stains from the walls. I opened every window wide so the wind could carry the smell of the past far away. I walked upstairs. My steps were slow but steady. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom. I picked up Grace's photograph that had been left face down on the shelf. Using the edge of my shirt, I wiped away the thin layer of dust. I placed Grace's photo back where it belonged on the bedside shelf beside the old wooden clock. I looked into her eyes in the picture and smiled. I kept my promise. Our house is finally free of those who betrayed it. Reflection flowed through me like cool water. I spent my life building. I spent half my life sacrificing. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to protect myself. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to destroy you. Being family is not a license for abuse. I looked down at my old hands. The scars from the woodworking shop were still there. They were the medals of an honest life of labor. They did not deserve to be humiliated by laziness and greed. I walked down to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. The sound of boiling water sang gently on the stove. I looked out at the backyard. Sophia was sitting in the grass laughing at a small butterfly drifting in front of her. My heart filled with a warm light. I will never make myself small again just to tolerate someone else's cruelty. My house is a sanctuary, not a sacrifice. It is a place meant to nurture kind souls, not shelter parasites. Night slowly settled. I sat on the old rocking chair on the porch. Above me the sky shimmered with stars. I no longer felt lonely. I felt strong. I felt proud. I had fought a battle that was never fair, and I had remained standing. I had taught Elijah the final lesson about responsibility. And I had given Sophia a safe future. A man is not defined by what he owns, but by what he is willing to protect. If you have stayed with this story until the end, please take a quick moment to help us subscribe and comment with the name of the city you are watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. I took a sip of the hot tea. The gentle bitterness on my tongue slowly faded into a quiet sweetness. That was exactly the taste of my life now. Only after bitterness do we truly understand the value of peace. I breathed in deeply. The air was filled with the scent of dry grass and pine wood. And at last I had become its rightful owner.